Never stops. Even when He's working, He never stops working. Hallelujah, Lord. Even when. Never stop. Waymaker, promise keeper, my God, that is who you are. Waymaker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. That is who you are. That is who you are. That is who He is.
That is who you are. That is who you are.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to have you with us today at the Regeneration Project live from home this week. As Maureen said, there was a few, Linda's not well this weekend or today, and Paul was away, and so that puts a bit of constraints in terms of people around to set up and pack down and that sort of thing. So we are live from home just for 1 week. We will hopefully be back next week when everybody is back together, and we look forward to that. We are going to look at Galatians chapter number 6, verses 1 to 5. As soon as I have finished my talk on here on Facebook Live, we're going to jump on Zoom, and so anyone that's around that wants to be part of our usual debrief, we're going to do that, albeit via Zoom, like we used to. It's strange. It's like we've gone back in time a year or two, but here we are. So we're going to read from the book of Galatians, chapter number 6, verses 1 to 5, and it says this. It says, "My friends, if anyone is detected in a transgression, you who have received a Spirit should restore such a one in the spirit of gentleness. Take care that you yourselves are not tempted. Bear one another's burdens. In this way you fulfill the law of Christ. For if those who are nothing think they are something, they deceive themselves. All must test their own work. Then that work, rather than their neighbour's work, will become a cause for pride. For all must carry their own loads." This morning I just want to talk to you for a few minutes on the power of a restorative restorative community. That's what I want to talk about. The power of a restorative community. You know, one of the things I know is that we are not designed to be alone. We have evolved in our lives to live our lives as individual members in supportive groups, in groups of people that meet together and gather together and connect together in a variety of different ways. We call these things communities. We are designed to survive. We are designed to thrive by being connected with one another. That very verse from the book of Genesis, when God looks at what he's created and he said it's not good that man should be alone. And I think that is a truth for all of us. It's not good that we're alone. I don't know about you. I know some people like alone time, but I am someone who, I don't like being alone. I like being around and with people. I'm charged by that. And I think there is something about all of us that needs to connect with other people, whether that's, you know, however that is, however you want to connect. There is something about us that needs to connect, that needs to reach out to other people. And when these supportive groups, when our communities are at their best, they facilitate healing, they facilitate transformation. And I believe that's what the church is meant to be. It's meant to be a restorative community. It's meant to be a community that works in restoring people's lives, people's families, people's relationships. And when we are part of such communities and when we live in communion with each other, our healing, our transformation happens. It begins to happen. Our life together should make each other better if our community is working right. And that's what I want to sort of talk about this morning. I want to talk about the work of the church in restoring lives, the work of church community in restoring lives. Why I believe church community is so important. People may ask, well, why is it important that we meet regularly, we connect regularly? It's important because that community is important. There's a word in that I mentioned, that word restore or restoration, and it means to render, it means to fit, to complete, to mend what has been broken or destroyed. It means to repair, to complete, to fit out, to equip, to put in order, to adjust, to strengthen, to perfect, to make one what he or she ought to be. The idea here when we talk about restoration is to take something that is fallen into dilapidation, that has been broken, and to restore it to its former glory, or to what it once was. Restoration is the careful work of renovation. It's the careful work of rebuilding. And like I said, the work of the church, I believe, is restoration. And you know, sometimes, and we are all human, but sometimes we can get on our own high horses, can't we? And we can consider people beyond restoration, beyond redemption. And I honestly believe that if we have that view, and we don't challenge that view, then we need to pack up shop. The church is about restoration. The church is a place of second chance, third chance, fourth chance, fifth chance, however many chance, 70 times 70. Someone in one of the scriptures said, Jesus said that in one of the scriptures when it comes to forgiveness. There is nobody that is beyond the work of God's restoration. The work of the church is restoration, and we need to be involved in that. Paul writes and encourages the church in Corinth. Just thinking about restoration and what we see in scriptures, Paul encourages the church in Corinth in his closing statement of his second letter. He says, finally, brothers and sisters, rejoice, strive for full restoration, encourage one another, be of one mind, live in peace, and the God of love and peace will be with you. He says the idea there is strive for full restoration. This is the work of God. God is a restorer. He can restore us. He can restore our emotions, our mental well-being, our spiritual lives, our homes, our families. He is a restorer. And you see this again and again in scripture, in Amos chapter 9 verse 14, and he says, I will bring my people back from exile. They will rebuild the ruined cities and live in them. They will plant vineyards and drink their wine. They will make their gardens and eat their fruit. In Isaiah 61 verse 7, he says, instead of shame, you will receive double portion. Instead of disgrace, you will rejoice in your inheritance. And so you will inherit a double portion of your land, and everlasting joy will be yours. In the book of Joel, in chapter 2, verse 25 to 26, he says, I will repay you the years the locusts have eaten, the great locusts and the young locusts and the other locusts and the locust swarm. That's a lot of locusts, right? My great army that I send among you, and you will have plenty to eat until you are full, and you will praise the name of the Lord your God, who has worked wonders for you. Never again will my people be shamed. Isaiah 68 verse 12, your ancient cities ruins will be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called a repairer of the breach, a restorer of the streets to dwell in. And then finally, the final scripture I just want to sort of mention is Deuteronomy chapter 30 verses 3 to 4. God, your God, will restore everything you lost. He will have compassion on you. He will come back and pick up the pieces from all the places where you were scattered. No matter how far away you end up, God, your God, will get you out of there. Hopefully what you see in those scriptures that I've mentioned is that God is a restorer. That is the work of God. That is the work of our faith, the work of restoration. And therefore the work of the church is restoration. It is restoring people's lives, restoring people's homes, restoring communities, restoring marriages, restoring friendships, restoring relationships, restoring. That is what we ought to be in the business of doing. Our text that I read this morning from Galatians 6, it follows hot on the heels of Paul encouraging the Galatian church to walk in the Spirit in Galatians chapter 5. This is where he lists out all the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, patience, peace, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And he says, if we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. And what he's saying there is the Spirit is not just an idea, it's not just a concept, it's not just a philosophy, but it's a way of life. It's something we choose to do. It's something we commit to doing. Live in the Spirit, he says. And then if we live in the Spirit, let us walk in the Spirit. And so straight after this idea of walking in the Spirit, listing out what it means to walk in the Spirit, Paul talks about the restoration of those that are fallen. And it's interesting because of all the things Paul could have chosen to speak about that would have been totally appropriate after listing out the fruits of the Spirit and encouraging people to walk in the Spirit, Paul chooses his next words to be about restoration. This is what he says. He says, my friends, if anyone is detected in a transgression, you who have received the Spirit should restore such a one in the spirit of gentleness. The word here for fallen is the word trespass. It means fault, fall, sin. It means a lap or deviation. It means to fall aside, to step aside, to misstep. The idea here is that when you should have stood upright, but you haven't, you've fallen. The idea is that when you know better, but you don't do better. And this is both intentional and unintentional. People like to talk about, oh, well, it was intentional or it was unintentional. Listen, when it comes to God, God is a restorer. Whether your intentionality is there or not, God is in the business of restoring you. And so the very next words that comes to Paul's mind when he's talking about the fruits of the Spirit is restoring others. Isn't it interesting? That's what the business of the church is. That's what the business of the Regeneration Project is. That's what the business of church community ought to be about. Paul makes a direct connection between the fruits of the Spirit walking in the Spirit, and then us being there to gently restore each other. That is the work of the Spirit. Now, Paul says this. Paul says, if a person is overtaken in a fault, the New International Version says, if someone is caught in a sin, then you that are spiritual should restore them in the spirit of gentleness. It's an interesting term there from the NIV. You who are spiritual. Who are those who are spiritual? Well, we know who those who are spiritual are because it's a direct correlation to Galatians chapter 5. What it means to be spiritual is it means to be filled with God's Spirit, and therefore you are growing the fruits of the Spirit in your life. Someone who is spiritual is someone that is demonstrating the fruits of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, or self-control. It's interesting because when we talk about spiritual sometimes as Christians, we get into all kinds of kookiness about what spirituality means. No, spirituality means love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's what spirituality is. And if you are growing those in your life, if they are manifesting in your life, then that means that you are someone spiritual. And it says, if someone has fallen, then you that are spiritual, restore them in the spirit of gentleness. The idea here is that there is an overflow of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control from our lives. And wherever that is, that overflow, that we are qualified to do the work of restoration. We are qualified to help somebody else find healing. We are qualified to walk on that journey of healing with somebody, and we are qualified to help bring them back into who God has called them to be and who they are meant to be. Paul instructs us, restore the fallen in spirit, restore the fallen in a spirit of meekness and gentleness. Meekness and gentleness. You know, if we want to restore other people and other people's lives and other people's relationship, the one thing that we need is meekness and gentleness. Gentleness is goodness, integrity, kindness. It means being fair. It means being mild, humble, benevolent, humane. So that's what this idea of gentleness, that's how we ought to restore someone. Sometimes you see people and they're mean and nasty and they talk about, well, I'm doing what they need to do and I'm restoring them. No, that's not meekness. Meekness is that humbleness, that integrity, that goodness, that kindness, that benevolence that we can have. When Paul writes, he says to him, and he warns us, he says, look to yourself, lest you be tempted too. Okay, and when Paul is talking about temptation here, he's not talking about whether you're tempted with the same thing that someone who is fallen has been tempted with. No. What Paul is talking about here when he talks about temptation, he's talking about us being tempted not to be judgmental, not to be condemning, not to be nasty and horrible and finger pointing and looking down our nose at other people. He's cautioning us not to fall into the sin of judgment and condemnation of others. Michael Youssef defines meekness as meekness is when you're in the position of strength and power, yet you choose not to use that power against your opponent, your critic, your accuser, your persecutor. And that's the same idea, that when we are in a place of power with other people, and we could point the finger, we could tut our teeth, we could look down at them for whatever self-righteous reason we choose to. But Paul says, no, don't be tempted to fall into the sin of judgment. Restore someone with gentleness and meekness. Paul goes on to say in the text that we read, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. When we talk about bearing one another's burdens, the idea here is to get under the weight of the burden and to help someone lift it up. When we talk about bearing one another's burdens, this isn't a job of an instructor. This isn't a job of a supervisor. This isn't the job that you do from afar. This isn't the job that you look at someone and point to them and tell them, oh, well, you need to do this, that, and the other. No, no, no. This means getting alongside somebody and letting their burden, letting the weight of their burden be shared by your strength. It's when you get under their burden and you help them lift that burden up. The word bear here literally means to take up with hands, to take up in order to carry or bear, to put upon oneself something to be carried, to bear something that is burdensome. What it means is that your burden becomes my burden, and together we get under the weight of that burden and we hold that thing up until you're strong enough to hold it by yourself. I love the Message translation of this text. Eugene Peterson, he pens it in this way. He says, live creatively, friends. If someone falls into sin, forgivingly restore them, saving your critical comments for yourself. You might need forgiveness before the day's out. Stoop down, reach out to those who are oppressed, share their burdens, and so complete the law of Christ. That's our job. That's my job, and that's your job. Our job as Christians, as people who call ourselves followers of Christ, as believers, is to get under the burdens of others and help our brothers and sisters lift that burden up. And if I was in church here today, in a church building today, I would say, tell your neighbour as long as it takes, because that's our job. As long as it takes, let's do it. As long as it takes, let's bear each other's burdens. And this is the reason why I believe the church is necessary. It's necessary because we need healing. It's necessary. The church is necessary because we need life-giving, life-generating communities. And that's what the church is meant to be. We need churches because we need communities where people can come together who would not normally come together in any other social setting or any other circumstance, where we live and we work together for the betterment of others. We're not together because we share the same tastes in things. We're not together because we have the same likes. We're not even together because we think the same way or vote the same way. We are together because we believe in God. And because we believe in God, we believe in the work of restoration, and we believe in the work of helping others, and we believe in the work of loving, of love, of hope, of joy and peace. And we believe in the work of getting under each other's burdens and helping to bear each other's burdens. Church communities should be healing communities. And I know that's not always the case. I know that often churches have become places of spiritual abuse and deep hurt. And we've all experienced that, but that shouldn't be. Our job as followers, our job as members of the Regeneration Project is to make sure it remains a place of life, a place of hope, a place of joy, a place of strength, a place of beauty. That's our job, to ensure that the Regeneration place, it fits into God's kingdom and becomes a restorative community, a place where people get better, a place where we make each other better. You know, a healing community is about holding space, a holding space for love, care, reflection, laughter, crying, feeling what we're feeling, dancing, screaming, sorting through, moving past, sifting with, or whatever else the place may be. It's a holding space. It's a space that people can come to find what they need in that moment. A church community is a healing community, is a sacred place where we can be vulnerable, where we can open up, and where the work of restoration can begin in our lives. It's a place where we can find somebody else and realize that we're not going through this alone, and we don't have to go through this alone. It's a place where we can share our vulnerabilities in different ways with different members of the community, and we can find the help that we need. And so when we talk about healing communities is not about putting our problems off and on another person, but it's about holding space for us to set down the weight that we are carrying for a while. And we hold it down by bearing one another's burdens. We hold it down by sharing that weight. It's a place where we let others hold the weight for a while. It's a place where we share that weight for other people. And it's a place where we find peace, we find rest, we find restoration, we find hope, we find joy. You know, one of the things I've discovered over the last few weeks is we all have issues. Sometimes when we are in churches, we like to think we're the doctors and you're the patient. And, you know, leaders like to think that. And people like to think, I'm all right, there's nothing wrong with me, but I'm here for other people. But one of the things I've discovered over the last few weeks and months, but particularly as we've been going through the series that we are going through, is that we all have issues. We all need healing. We all need that work of transformation and restoration. There are things that I am working on, and I can only work on them with your help, with your strength, with your courage, with your encouragement, with your love, with your joy that you're willing to offer to me. And so I'm almost done today talking about the work or the power of restorative communities. But there are a few things I think we need to do to cultivate the work of restoration in our community. And I just want to share those things, a few things that we need to continue to do to cultivate the work of healing and restoration in the Regeneration Project. The first thing is we need humility. And I mentioned that before this morning. We need humility, a real humility, a humility that enables us to set aside our judgment, our condemnation, our opinion of righteousness and rightness in order that somebody else can be restored. I use the term set aside your judgment, and I use it deliberately because we often say to people, don't judge, but we all judge. That's how human beings are. You get onto a bus, you step into a room, you make judgments. You see somebody for the first time, you start to make judgments about that person or those group of people. And judgment is what we do. And so it's not helpful to say don't judge because we all judge. But what we need to do is to learn to set aside our judgments. We need to learn to see beyond our judgments. We need to learn to not let our judgment be the last word when we are dealing with other people. You know, when I have sort of seen beyond the judgments I have made about other people, and I've not let my judgment be the last word, I've experienced some of the joys of friendship with people. Just by pushing it aside, forgetting what I think I know, and just learning to reach out and connect with other people. You know, Jesus says this, he says, judge not lest you be judged. And I think what he's getting here is that put in our judgment, push your judgment out the way, because one day you will need somebody to do the same for you. Give people buckets of mercy and kindness and the benefit of the doubt, because one day you will need all of those buckets to come back to you. You know, judgment is a funny thing, because we talk about we've all sinned and we're all not perfect, none of us are perfect and all of that sort of thing, but we do judge, don't we? And sometimes when we judge, our judgment says, well, my sin's not as bad as your sin's the real problem. And we are like this. And so we understand some sins and we don't understand others. We understand some people's fallenness because it's like our own, but we don't understand others. But when it comes to humility, we push all of that aside. We push all of the damning and the harshness and the unforgiveness out of the way. And we learn to live at the place of God's mercy. And that's how the work of restoration happens. The work of restoration happens when we realize we're all in the same boat. Your boat isn't better than my boat. My boat isn't better than your boat. And we all need the work of restoration. And we all come from different places and we all have different experiences. but we all need to learn humility, set our judgment aside, and learn how to love and respect each other. Learn how to tread around each other with humility, not arrogance. Humility, that's the first thing. The second thing we need to cultivate a restorative community is value, or recognizing the value in others. In the work of restoration, we need to recognize ultimately the value that God places on us and the value that God places on others. And this starts with humility, but it goes beyond it. And what it literally means, it means that you see beyond someone's faults. You see beyond someone's sinfulness. You see beyond someone's failures. You see beyond someone's brokenness. What it means is that you don't let their brokenness have the last word. You know, it's interesting, isn't it? When people are disgraced publicly, and we saw that this week, those of you that follow the Oscars, we saw the public disgrace, and we remember that, we revel in it, we share it, we talk about it, we throw our own theories into it. And years now, we'll remember he's the guy that slapped the guy at that event. And we'll remember he's the guy that told the joke that may have been insensitive. He's the one that done this, that, and the other. And that's how we are. You know, we remember people by their failures. But when we talk about value, what we're doing is we're changing the narrative. We're choosing to see that God gives people new names. God gives people new stories. What we're doing when we talk about value in others and recognizing that value, we're talking about choosing to forget what we think we know about that story, forget what we saw, and begin to see them as God sees them, as his beloved child. We need to treat and see each other as God's beloved. We need to recognize that love that God has placed upon every individual, and even the ones that we're not keen about, because it's easy to love people you like, but we need to learn how to love people we don't like, and we need to learn how to hold that value as sacred. You know, don't write each other off. Don't let our historical experience of somebody be our limitation when it comes to God's grace, God's mercy, and them thriving. The third thing that we need as a restorative community is empathy. Empathy is the experience of understanding another person's thoughts, feelings, condition. And the idea of empathy is understanding it from somebody else's point of view. It's putting yourself in somebody else's place. It's trying to understand what they feel like after being through what they've been through. And empathy is important because empathy facilitates helping behaviors that come from within rather than being forced. You know, we can force ourselves. I'll be kind to them, be nice to them. We can force ourselves to do it. But empathy is something natural that comes from within when we are empathetic towards other people. We behave in a more compassionate manner because we are beginning to try and understand how someone is. Empathy is the discipline of seeking to understand, putting yourself, like I said, in somebody else's shoes. And empathy starts with listening without condemnation and judgment. You see, it's all connected to that humility. It's choosing not to dehumanize someone. It's choosing not to blame someone. It's choosing sometimes not to take sides. The work of empathy gives perspective, and it helps us navigate that road to healing from where that person currently is. The fourth thing that a restorative community needs is compassion. And compassion comes from empathy. Compassion is the action. Compassion is the do word. It's the verb. Compassion literally means to suffer together. It's defined as a feeling that arises when you are confronted by another person's suffering and you are motivated to actually do something. Not just feel pity for them, oh, poor them, you know, I'll say a prayer for them. No, you are motivated to try and relieve that suffering in some way. This is where we bear one another's burdens, where we walk the long and sometimes painful walk to healing and restoration. When we are compassionate, it's a place where we share our stories, where we share our vulnerabilities, where we share our time and our stuff. It's a place where we act generously towards somebody else. And the most important thing that we are generous with is our love and our kindness. The fifth thing I want to mention about and this is the final thing in terms of a restorative community, is a restorative community needs storytelling. A restorative community needs storytelling. You know, one of the most important things we do as a community of people, and we do it in different ways in different communities, but one of the most important things we do is we tell stories. We tell stories in different ways. We tell stories through teaching and preaching. We still tell stories through sharing. We tell stories through our liturgy. We tell stories through sacred things like communion. It's retelling a story and acting out that story. We retell stories. We retell stories that we see in Scripture. And also we tell the stories of our own journey and of our own experience. And these are important things for restorative communities. Stories are important tools because through storytelling, learning happens. Through storytelling, we address barriers. Through storytelling, we address injustices. Through storytelling, we address problems in our relationships and in our connections. Stories shape us and frame us and focus our community. We tell stories that hones our community in, and we focus it in a certain way because there is something that we feel is not right, that needs to be addressed and needs to be changed. Stories challenge cultural norms. I am a big sci-fi fan. And one of the sci-fi things series that I love is Star Trek. And I'm talking about going way back to the original Star Trek, because when you watch the original Star Trek and you understand the narrative of the 60s and the 70s, you understand that the writers were using that story to challenge cultural norms. They were using a story to challenge racism. One of my favorite episodes from the original Star Trek is where you had a race of people, and they were on one side of the face they were black, and on the other side of the face they were white. And there were two groups of people. One were black on this side and white on this side, and the other group were black on this side and white on this side. And they hated each other. And you know, Captain Kirk had come in, and they were like, but you're the same. But all they could see was the difference. And it was a story that was being told to challenge the injustice of what was happening at the time through the civil rights period and through the civil rights movements. And so stories challenge cultural norms. Stories challenge barriers. Stories share and transfer knowledge. You know, it's interesting. I remember stories that my parents have told me, and I've told my son and my granddaughters those stories. It's how we share and transfer knowledge. You know, some cultures have stories, and their stories are wise stories that help us learn lessons. You know, and we share them with the next generation, sometimes unknowingly, because that's the power of stories. Through stories, we unlearn. Through stories, we relearn. Through stories, we generate connection and emotional bonds with each other. There is nothing more powerful when you see someone that you don't really have a connection with, but you hear their story. And all of a sudden, you are bound to that person emotionally. You are bought into their life. And there is now something different about the relationship and the connection that you have with them. Through stories, we learn how to deal with each other's failures. We learn how to celebrate each other's successes. And through stories, and not always perfectly, in fact, very rarely perfectly, through stories, we learn how to figure it out together. Through stories, we see and we grasp alternative futures and alternative realities. Through stories, we see something different to ourselves. How many of you have been changed by a story you've heard that has switched your life because you've seen something different, you've seen something alternative for your life. That is the power of stories. And that is what a restorative community must be about. It must be about stories. And that is it, my brothers and sisters. The Regeneration Project must be a restorative community, or we just need to pack up shop and go home. That's the truth of the matter. That's what it means to be part of God's kingdom, to be a restorative community. And so my prayer today is that the Regeneration Project will continue to be part of that restoring process in people's lives. My prayer today is that through our community together in the Regeneration Project, and I'm not just talking about Sunday, but I'm talking about how we connect in different ways. I'm talking about how we interact and relate to each other. I'm talking about the different methods that we use to connect. Through all of that, my prayer today is that I will be healed and transformed, and that you will be healed and transformed, and that together we will heal and transform the world around us. And so God bless you today. I'm going to log off, and after I've logged off, we will jump onto Zoom. And for those of you that want to join us from Zoom, I've shared the link in the WhatsApp community, in the WhatsApp Regen thingy majid, and log on and let's spend some more time together. God bless you. Have a great afternoon.